So basically इरफान साहब के बारे में ये है कि I think इरफान साहब आपने पंजाब और केपी के जो पिछले एक दहाई में या उससे थोड़ा से ज़्यादा सबसे ज़्यादा असातिज़ा के हवाले से जो चेंजेस आई हैं आपने उनको काफ़ी प्लानिंग की है और ब्यूरोक्रेट्स के साथ झगड़े भी शायद किए होंगे in the process. So I think, sorry, G, go ahead, Irfan Saab. You know, that's kind of what that area that you've been in, right?
So you want me to speak about
I mean, eventually let me just introduce everyone first, and then I would love if you could bring that element in as well. Are we still audible?
Yeah, and
Yeah?
Dr. Rabia is
Cool.
with us.
Okay, great. So Rabia is behind us, and hey, Rabia, you're a fellow at the Institute of Development and Economic Alternatives, which is called IDEAS. So IDEAS is based in Lahore. It's a research institute in Lahore, and she's led research projects on the marketization of primary and secondary education, which, Rabia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, which has to do kind of with either private school के affect our education landscape. And then she's also looked at school-based management, inclusive education, and I think आज के panel के लिए the most exciting thing about what Rabia has been up to is that when she was a faculty member at the LUM School of Education, वहाँ पे she helped set up a cross-country course which used the RISE systems diagnostic framework to think about how education reform happens in different contexts. और ख़ास तौर पे मतलब कि ध्यान किस चीज़ पे दिया जाता है उस कोर्स के तहत इसके एजुकेशन के अंदर भी और एजुकेशन के बाहर के भी जो शोबे हैं वो सारे इकट्ठे आके जोड़ के किस तरह तालीम को बेहतर तरीके. Can you see us?
Thank you very much. And thanks for the flexibility for letting me join. I feel I'm looming a bit, but thank you very much.
Okay. Can everybody hear Rabia clearly? Cool. Our next panelist is Zora Nassir. Zora is the Director of Academics at Zindagi Trust and an alumna of the, alumna or alum?
Alumna?
Yeah, okay, I don't know. You know, you have those terms where you're not supposed to have the gender anymore, that kind of thing. Of the 2012 cohort of Teach for Pakistan. So Zora has also served as a senior faculty member at the Government Teacher College in Karachi, and where she was part of the team transforming the college into a model of excellence for teacher education. So this is the work with Durbeen, is it? Yeah, okay, cool. Zora is a Fulbright alumna and received her Master's of Education in Learning and Instruction from Vanderbilt in 2016. Zora, thanks so much. Really looking forward to hearing your perspective from the ground. I know that Durbeen has been doing some very, very exciting work. And our final panelist is Tuba Akhtar. Excuse me. So Tuba Akhtar is the Chief Program Officer at Teach for Pakistan and an alumna of Teach for Pakistan's first cohort in 2011. So I'm assuming that, Tuba, you know the people there and they believe.
Home ground.
You know, Tuba, going by that response, you could run for an election, I guess. Tuba is responsible for overseeing programmatic development and success at the organization. And I guess aap sab evidence or sabut ho कि Tuba's been very good at her job. She's been looking at recruitment, leadership, training, and alumni impact. Tuba is also a Fulbright alumni, having received her Master's of Education in International Education Policy from Harvard. So thank you so much, Tuba, for joining us today. I don't know, should I be introducing myself? I'm Dr. Safia Siddiqui. I'm assistant professor at the LUMS School of Education. My research work focuses primarily on teacher education and teacher policy, and most of my work has to do with KP. So ज़्यादातर मेरा काम KP के साथ जुड़ा हुआ है और आजकल मैं KP के teacher education policy और teacher policy broadly पे किताब भी लिख रही हूँ. Yeah, I guess let's get started. आज की जो गुफ्तगू है उसको थोड़ा सा मैं structure देना चाहूँगी and then I'll hand it over to the panelists. So दो चीज़ें हैं. पहली चीज़ ये है कि मैं चाह रही हूँ कि हम सब थोड़ी थोड़ी अपनी पोजीशन समझा सकें ऑडियंस को और ये बता सकें कि हम क्या समझते हैं कि पाकिस्तान के अंदर एक अच्छा उस्ताद या अच्छी उस्तानी कौन होती है और वो क्यों नहीं पैदा हो पा रहे, बिकॉज पाकिस्तान के अंदर ये बहुत एक बड़ी असम्पशन है या फ़र्ज़ किया जाता है कि सारे ज़िंदगी के दुनिया के सारे मसाइल पाकिस्तान के असातिज़ा की नाअहली की वजह से हैं। एंड हकीकतन ये इस तरह नहीं है, बिकॉज यू नो आवर टीचर्स वर्क वेरी हार्ड इन स्कूल्स। अगर आप हालात देखें, आप सब वाकिफ़ होंगे कि जिन हालात का सामना करके आप पढ़ाने जाते हैं, सो आपको एक अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस मिल गया होगा कि इतना आसान नहीं है और इतना सही भी नहीं है ये कहना कि पाकिस्तान के असातिज़ा सही काम नहीं कर रहे, इसीलिए पूरा तालीमी निज़ाम बैठ चुका है, राइट। सो थोड़ा सा मैं ये चाहूँगी कि आज के हमारे सारे पैनलिस्ट अपने अपने रिस्पेक्टिव पर्सपेक्टिव से हमें बता सकें कि उन्होंने क्या देखा, क्या सुना, क्या किस चीज़ के बारे में उन्होंने क्या कोशिश की। फिर मैं चाहूँगी कि इसका थोड़ा सा हम 25 से 30 मिनट कोशिश करें कि हम सवालात ले सकें आप सब से, ताकि फिर उसके जवाब में हमारे पैनलिस्ट मुख्तलिफ अपने जो भी पोजीशंस हैं उनको मज़ीद वाज़े कर सकें। सो डज़ दैट sound good to everybody in the audience? Okay, so let's get started. So we'll start with Irfan Sahab. Irfan Sahab, अगर आप थोड़ा systemic perspective से बात कर सकें कि आपकी experiences पंजाब के पी के ख़ास तौर पे teacher reform policy से जो जुड़ी हुई experiences हैं, and then आप तो खुद teacher रह भी चुके हैं, तो that journey from being a teacher and practicing to then kind of setting up policies for teachers, what do you think makes a good teacher?
Can you hear me? Okay. So I think I have about 5 minutes or so, right, to do that. So I think I'll just pick on your the part of your question जहाँ आप कह रही हैं कि आपने क्या देखा. So मैंने क्या देखा उसको मैं सुनाने की कोशिश करता हूँ. And then I think उसमें से कुछ ऐसे शायद ऐसे एलिमेंट्स सामने आ जाएं जिसको then we can carry them further. So it will be my own story as a teacher, right? I started teaching physics in 1992. When I started teaching, I had not undergone any teacher education program, right? So no teacher training whatsoever. And it's interesting, and I think I want this to be parked because a lot of us, and I've come across people who think that teacher education or teacher training is not needed. And at that time in 1992, I also thought that I was a good teacher without having gone through any teacher training. And why did I think so? Because I was carrying in my head the image of what it means to be a good teacher, which found its place in my head because of the observation that I had been doing as a student for as long as I was a student in my school, in high school, in college. You know, we all come across good teachers. And while we are taught by them, we also carry some of what good teaching is all about in our head with us, right? And those definitions of good teaching may not be very desirable, you know, from a teacher education, from modern teacher education perspective, but that's what we have that we're carrying in our heads, right? Some people also call it apprenticeship of observation. You know, we observe teachers in action and we develop ideas about what teaching is all about. And so I was one of those teachers. I thought I was a good teacher until in 1995 it was that I became a teacher education, which was not something that I had planned, but I found myself in Ali Institute of Education as a teacher educator in their Department of Mathematics Education. This is 1995. Now, Ali Education institution was pretty much like दूरबीन है जैसे आपका ना, कि वहाँ पर it had become a place where people were coming in from Stockholm Institute of Education. We had travelers coming in from Teachers College, Columbia University, and you know, if we talk about, look at it as from the lens of cosmopolitanism, we had a lot of discursive strands coming together at one place. तो वहाँ हमें पता चला कि प्रोजेक्ट बेस्ड लर्निंग क्या होती है, चाइल्ड सेंटर्ड लर्निंग क्या होती है, कंस्ट्रक्टिविज्म क्या है, so on and so forth. And at that point, I thought, oh my God, this is really hard. You know, I thought teaching was very simple, but it's not that, and so you have to think about a lot of other things when you teach. So it's complex, right? And so that was the kind of understanding that one develops when one is with teacher education. I remember a legendary teacher whose name was Robert Langland. I don't know if people in the room know him. He came to Pakistan when we became independent and stayed here. I met him at Ali Institute of Education, where he was visiting, and I asked him a question, what do you think about teacher education? And his response was, he looked at me and he smiled and he said, young man, I was young at that time, he said, all you need to teach well is a sound knowledge of your subject and a passion to teach. So that's the kind of idea about teaching that a lot of us, they carry with them throughout their careers, that teacher training and teacher education is not really needed. Okay, the last thing that I want to tell you is the year 2000, when I was doing my doctoral degree, that I came across these efforts to professionalize teaching in the United States. And so what was happening there was that this is how the argument went. There are all of these professions like engineering and medicine, they have their own specialized knowledge base, right? But when you think about teaching, everybody seems to know, because of the apprenticeship observation that I've just mentioned, what teaching is all about, right? And so some of them argued that teaching also has a specialized knowledge base, and they called it pedagogical content knowledge. Many of us might be aware of that. And so those were some of the things that I wanted to tell before we move on to the next panelist, because I think what we have really is, what good teaching is all about is kind of perceived between two poles. On one side, you have the professional standards and stuff like pedagogical content knowledge and all of that stuff that comes with professionalization of teaching. On the other hand, you have apprenticeship observation, where you can have 1 million opinions about what good teaching is all about, right? And so somewhere in that spectrum, we kind of perceive what good teaching is all about based on our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irfan Saab. Really appreciate that experience. Just to kind of bring two things together, अभी जो आपने बातें की हैं, एक जो ज़ोरा मैं आपसे सवाल पूछना चाहूँगी, and hopefully you can build that into your larger comment, which is जो अभी इरफान साहब ने जिक्र किया apprenticeship observation के बारे में, तो जो practicum है, and I think कि आप लोग ने भी दूरबीन के साथ जो काम किया है, practicum होता है component teacher training programs के अंदर, so it isn't like we've abandoned the idea कि observation के ज़रिए लोग सीख सकते हैं teaching के बारे में. But do you think कि pedagogy scientific है? Right? Because that's the kind of the other end of the spectrum now. And it's this tension. Do we have a scientifically reproducible way of teaching people how to teach? Like it's come to a situation जहाँ LUMS के professors को भी कहा जाता है कि आप जाके teaching training लेकर आएं तो फिर आप पढ़ाएं. So what do you think, Zara? Over to you.
Absolutely. I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about this idea of apprenticeship of observation that Dr. Irfan Nassir talked about. We're all observing teachers all around us. We've all been students. We've all observed teachers for at least 16 years, probably more. A lot of us have kids. We're observing teachers in their classrooms as well. Teaching is the one profession that everybody has an opinion on, but nobody really has expertise on. And that's where we err with this idea of observation. We think just because we've seen it, we know what it is. And I think we really need to unpack that. I think we also need to go back to the history of how teaching as a profession started and see why that has informed what we believe about a good teacher. So how did teaching really start here in the subcontinent? It started as a missionary mission where Christian missionaries were sent into this newly ruled land, and they were setting up these church-based schools that were trying to civilize the population in a different kind of way. So and a lot of the schools in the early years of this country were convent schools, and the people who worked in them were missionaries. We've retained a lot of this attitude about teaching, not just in the subcontinent, but also in the US and also across the world. We think that teachers are people who are there for the spiritual development of the young, who are there to nurture the young, who are largely female and maternal and taking care of children. And we think that these people are selfless human beings who will do everything just for rewards in the afterlife. सवाब के लिए काम करने वाले लोग बिल्कुल selfless. तो जब हम इस तरह टीचिंग के बारे में सोचते हैं तो हम टीचिंग को एज अ प्रोफेशन नहीं लेते, हम उसको एक कॉलिंग की तरह लेते हैं और फिर वो एक बहुत एक अनसुपरवाइज्ड इनफॉर्मल रेल्म में चली जाती है. So some of the work that I've done with Durbin and what Durbin is trying to accomplish as an organization is to go back and examine these ideas. Can anyone be a teacher? Should anyone be a teacher? Is teaching just about nurturing and spirituality? Is it just something that that doesn't need training? The idea that Durbin proposes is that no, actually, teaching is this very rigorous, very high responsibility profession, and no one should be teaching who isn't trained to and who isn't accredited to. So I know we're a really long way away from the vision, but the idea is that eventually every teacher who walks into a school in Pakistan, whether it's a private school or a public school, should have a degree, should have a license saying that they know what they're doing and we can trust them in their classroom. And through Durbin's work in advocacy, they've actually passed a law in Sindh where we now, for the first time, have a teacher licensure exam, which 4,000 teachers sat for. And those teachers who passed the exams were inducted into the government service at a high level, at a prestigious level. And interestingly, Durbin graduates passed that exam in high numbers with really great performances as well. So we know we were doing something right there. So I do think that teaching is something that should be treated as a profession and not just as something that anybody can do. Why? I'll go back to my experiences with Teach for Pakistan here. When I started with Teach for Pakistan, just like all of you, I had a lot of passion. I really wanted to do well by the students that I was serving, but did I know what I was doing? Did I know what I should be teaching, how I should be teaching it, and more importantly, how to be around my students? I still look back at some of the things that I said, some of the things that I did in my classroom, and I now, knowing what I know after my master's degree, I sometimes think, hey, I did a lot of good, but I may have caused some damage too, and there's no way to undo the damage that I did. So on a personal level, what was the damage that I was doing? I didn't know how to manage my frustration. I wasn't a very patient person. How did that translate across to my students? I was just really, really focused on grades and academic achievement, and this idea that so many people, Dr. Panjwani, et cetera, have talked about today. Where was the heart? Was I nurturing people's hearts as much as their academic outcomes? So I think somebody who goes into a place where young, vulnerable populations who don't have any control over the interaction that they're going to have are at your mercy, you need to have thought about it really deeply. And that's where I think teacher education, high-quality, rigorous teacher education is so important. What is that going to teach you? That's going to teach you content knowledge. That's going to teach you observational skills. That's going to teach you pedagogical knowledge. It's also going to teach you how to manage yourself, your emotional regulation, who you are as a person, who you want to be, so that you can then take that forward to students a little bit better. And I think we need more institutions that are offering this when we talk about how are we going to empower teachers. The first step is setting up more and more institutions and programs that do a rigorous job of this. That is, again, part of the core mission of Durbin. And one of the steps that we've taken in collaboration with the AKU IID is offering an MPhil scholarship program so that people who are interested in taking on this work of teacher education can help and can get the qualifications to do so. So I would encourage all of you to really look that up as well. Dr. Sophia talked about a practicum and is pedagogy scientific. So I would say yes, the apprenticeship of observation that comes through practicum, the guided practice that comes through having a supervised teaching experience and a supervised observational experience, I think it's incredibly valuable because talking about theory and talking about practice are totally different things. Any high-quality teacher training program should have a practical component. And then this question of is pedagogy scientific? I think absolutely it is. I think you need to know about how the brain works. Some of you were in the room yesterday when I talked about neural connections and how the brain actually is set up. If you don't understand that as an educator, I think you lose out. So part of the B.Ed program is studying psychology, is studying brain development, is studying all of this, as well as thinking about how can an idea be broken down into chunks that people can understand and how can it be modeled. So these are very sort of technical and scientific ideas. So that's basically where I am. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zora. And I think that, that's quite comprehensive, and that covers many different aspects to how we think about teachers, teaching, getting them ready to teach. And Duba, what I want to kind of bring to your attention is this point about we need more institutions. So HEC ने एक ज़माने में ये experiment किया हुआ है पाकिस्तान की universities के साथ कि हर जगह universities खोल लो, and we're still not a fantastic country in terms of university quality. So मेरा सवाल ये होगा आपसे specifically कि आपके जो तजुर्बा रह चुका है Teach for Pakistan के साथ और अभी भी आप उनके साथ ही हैं, आप लोग ये सब कुछ कर रहे हैं ना? You're paying attention to pedagogic knowledge, content knowledge, but वो जो surrounding structures हैं जिसके अंदर ये एक आप best practice model भी पैदा कर लें, उस structure के अंदर जब आप जाते हैं, what happens then? And relatedly, कि जो HEC ने B.Ed के जो outline दी हुई है, अगर उसको ही हम जारी रखें, so is that sufficient? Because I personally don't think it is, but I want to know from you what your experience has been.
So far be it from me to talk about the sufficiency or not of B.Ed models and what the guidelines are, but I can talk a little bit about what we see. What I've seen, at least in the context of our work with Teach for Pakistan, and I think more importantly, how some of the fundamentals, when they come together, how even within the same structures, you can see very, very drastically different classrooms. And so I'll start from that. We work in government schools across the rural sectors of Islamabad and now also in Karachi. And in the past, I've also worked in disadvantaged contexts. And so on average, when we start teaching, the kids we're working with are 4 years behind where they need to be. So class 5 ka bacha, basics class 1 ki, aksar nahi kar sakta. In 2 years of Teach for Pakistan academic time, which is academically that's less time, kids grow by 4.4 years on average. That's tremendous amounts of growth. ये वही government school है, ये वही government school की किताबें हैं, ये वही buildings हैं, वहाँ पे उतनी बिजली जाती है, all of that, right? And so हमने क्या सीखा है about even within these environments, principal भी वही है, बाकी school की teachers भी वही हैं. What is enabling this to come together? And some of that we've been talking about in the early parts of the day. And honestly, without sounding overly simplistic, it's some of that stuff we've been talking about all morning because it is not rocket science anymore. We do understand some of these things. All of us do. We talk about them all of the time. And I think how they comes together has to be connected with purpose again. Because I think if we want a teacher, and what we define good teaching, we always have to go back to, are we recruiting a teacher for that purpose? इस मुल्क में साबुन बेचने के लिए भी आपसे पूछेगा भाई साबुन क्यों बेचना है और उसका भी एक सही और गलत जवाब है. You can potentially not be hired by an FMCG if you give you the wrong answer of why you want to sell soap and shampoo. But for a teacher, are we asking people, why do you want to be a teacher? I don't know. I don't think so. We're still not thinking about what are the competencies required for effective teaching, for what we are actually asking our teachers to do, and aligning our recruitment systems to that. And we have talked in the morning a lot about support systems and how do we professionalize some of that. And I think second, third, that has to go hand in hand. But I think we haven't really talked about on what competencies are we bringing people in, because if you don't bring in people for those competencies, you can do lots, but you can't expect them to do what you haven't hired them for.
I think, excuse me. Atuba, you've picked up on a really, really important point, and I think this is exactly where Rabia, I would love to bring you in. Not just because you're the last panelist, but because specifically you've looked at these questions from a systemic perspective, Rabia. This thing that Tuba is saying, that we're not asking when we're recruiting why you want to be a teacher. We're not asking what your plans are when you do join the service. In your review and reflection on wider systems, and especially systems outside of Pakistan, I know that you've been on studies with, for example, Badi Sab is somewhere here, Bicep, sorry, I can't see you because the lights. But, looking at Ghana, for instance, looking at other contexts, are you able to say more about zooming out? Is there like a political economy obstacle that we keep running into in the Pakistan context when it comes to thinking truly and genuinely about teacher reform?
Thanks very much. So I think there is. I think so some of these points have been touched on, I think, across the day in discussions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Rabia, can you guys hear her? Okay, they can hear you.
Sorry. So, across the day, it's sort of been spoken about that the teachers are almost, they are the frontline service delivery providers, and the system tends to think of them as such. And various panelists have spoken about the course, they've spoken about other matters, including recruitment, etc. But I think one thing, so the system, in the way, the most dominant framework for thinking about the system is one that came out of the RISE project, which was also discussed in the first panel this morning, I believe. And it's offered a very useful way of thinking about the different stakeholders and the roles they play in education service delivery. It also helps visualize where the teachers are within the system, but also how other stakeholders are thinking about the teacher. So this is deviating a little bit from the question you asked in terms of international examples, and I hope I can come to that. But if I may very quickly sort of speak about the political economy of it, is the position of the teachers within the system tends to be at the bottom of many different hierarchies. So if the system is made up of, administrators, policymakers, politicians, students, citizens, etc., and it comes together to function in terms of accountability, then the teachers tend to be at the wrong end or the business end of the relationship accountability for almost everybody. So you make up the policy for it, and it applies to teachers, whether it's teacher training policies, whether it's support policies, etc. You make up the curriculum, and the teachers are meant to, execute that within classrooms, etc. who is it that the teachers hold accountable within this system? So if a well-functioning system has relationships of accountability, and most of these go across and both ways. So who is it that the teachers themselves, once they come in, if you get their recruitment right, etc., where is their voice within the feedback loop that helps systems of education work well? Or within, and you can look at private systems and you can look at public systems as well. Are teachers able to voice what they need and how they need it? If new policies are introduced, are they able to? So support policies are needed for sure, but how are those support policies that are imagined designed in the first place? Do they have teachers part of the design process of the policy, part of the implementation process, part of the evaluation process of the policy itself? And how does that then, sort of pan out and get fed back into the organization of the policy? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, in the academic discourse, comparisons across systems, the frameworks that identify how systems function well are still imagining teachers in a particular role where their own feedback and voices are missing from helping reorient the system in a way that it can function well. And we may find examples from across different countries where there are, I don't know how well this has been investigated, but where the voices of teachers, where there are feedback mechanisms that are functioning better, do you see higher motivation, better performance, etc.? So even while we speak about providing support to teachers, providing more finance to teachers, to schools, etc., it feels to me we're still talking at them, because our conceptualization of the roles of teachers is still as kind of mechanistic agents that exist to perform what they're told to do. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Rabia. I think so. I'm going to switch to Urdu for a little bit and summarize कि अभी तक जो बातचीत हुई है उसमें I think जो बड़े सवालात जो उठ के उभर के सामने आ रहे हैं, उसमें सबसे बड़ा सवाल तो ये है कि हमारे निज़ाम के अंदर रहते हुए हम किसी भी टीचर को, उस्ताद को या उस्तानी को हम तैयार हैं उनकी आवाज़ सुनने के लिए, ये जानने के लिए जो हार्श रियलिटीज़ वो शायद आपको बता देंगे कि हम किन हालात के अंदर रह के काम कर रहे होते हैं. एंड मैंने अपनी रिसर्च के दौरान बहुत सारे टीचर्स से इस तरह के सवाल पूछे कि अगर आपको कोई टीचर प्राइज़ मिले या अगर आपको कोई टीचर कार्ड मिले, टीचर कार्ड से मुराद कि आपको डिस्काउंट्स मिल जाएंगे एट्सेट्रा, किसी आप म्यूज़ियम में आपको डिस्काउंट मिल जाएगा अंदर जाने के लिए. वैसे तो म्यूज़ियम्स बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं हैं, लेकिन जो हैं अगर उनमें डिस्काउंट्स मिल जाएं, या फिर अगर किताबों पे आपको कोई रियायत पेश की जाए बुक स्टोर्स में एट्सेट्रा, तो आप खुश होंगे. एंड द इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग इज़ कि भारी अक्सर ये टीचर्स कहते थे कि ये किस किस्म का मजाक है. एंड इट्स इंटरेस्टिंग बिकॉज हम लोग पॉलिसी दफातर में बैठ के एग्जैक्टली इसी तरह की गुफ्तगू कर रहे होते हैं असातिज़ा के बारे में कि उनको कोई स्टार दे दो, कोई बोनस दे दो, कोई अवार्ड दे दो. एंड द नंबर वन थिंग दैट टीचर्स वांट, जिसका जिक्र रबिया ने किया इज़ दे वांट कि जो उनके बारे में पॉलिसी बनाई जा रही है, जो उनके लिए बनाई जा रही है, उस कमरे में उनको बिठा दें ताकि उनकी भी आवाज़ शामिल की जाए. एंड उससे एटलीस्ट जहाँ तक मेरा एक्सपीरियंस है, एंड आई गेस इस बात पे तो शायद सभी अब इत्तेफाक करते हैं कि इससे हमें सिर्फ एक चीज़ और सबसे अहम चीज़ पता चलती है, वो ये है कि हमारे असातिज़ा सोच रहे हैं और इसीलिए वो सवाल उठाना चाहते हैं कि जो काम हमसे करवाए जा रहे हैं हमसे भी पूछ लिया जाता कि हम ये करने के काबिल हैं या नहीं, और अगर करने के काबिल हैं तो किस तरीके से और कब और कैसे. राइट. सो आई थिंक अगर हम वहाँ से थोड़ा सा if we open up the floor, I would love कि आप लोग अपने तजर्बे के बुनियाद पे हमसे भी सवालात पूछ सकें, लेकिन थोड़ा सा मैं हट के I know usually ये Q&A इसको कहा जाता है, पर पाकिस्तान में QC&A होता है, question comments भी होते हैं and then answers. तो अगर किसी ने comment भी share करना है तो no harm, and I would appreciate कि पीछे से कोई आवाज़ ये ना कसे कि questions not comments या questions not speeches वाले comments. मैं अभी कल थिंक फेस्ट में थी लाहौर में, तो वहाँ पे इस तरह की बातें बहुत हो रही थी. सो आई वुड encourage कि अगर if you have something nice to share as a comment, that would be welcome as well, so that this is kind of a participatory model. And I think that that's what the teachers want as well, कि पाकिस्तान में अगर हमने fundamentally सबसे पहले तालीमी निज़ाम को असातिज़ा के लिए मुनासिब बनाना है, तो सबसे पहले उनकी आवाज़ को हमने कुछ लोग कहेंगे बहाल करना है, क्योंकि एक ज़माने में असातिज़ा की आवाज़ थी पाकिस्तान में, और कुछ लोग कहेंगे फ़ाल करना है, क्योंकि उनके नज़रिए में असातिज़ा की कभी भी आवाज़ नहीं रही. सो डिपेंडिंग कि आप किस वर्ल्ड व्यू के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं, either one would be okay. लेकिन let's shall we open up for some questions, yeah, even comments on in your considered experiences. आपने स्कूलों में क्या देखा है, सुना है, and just one thing that I would want you to be able to maybe help us understand better, because आप लोग के पास वो granular on ground details हैं. मसूदा बानो एक researcher है, उन्होंने एक research paper लिखा जिसमें वो बात करती हैं कि अगर किसी भी आम से स्कूल के अंदर, खा वो लो कॉस्ट प्राइवेट स्कूल हो या इवन गवर्नमेंट का स्कूल हो, उसमें एक भी अच्छी टीचर अगर आ जाए, अच्छा टीचर आ जाए, तो उसके अंदर पूरे स्कूल का कल्चर बदल सकते हैं वो लोग. सो दैट दिस इज़ बेसिकली टाइंग इन विद दैट आइडिया ऑफ बीइंग अ चैम्पियन of change, right? An agent of change. So we would love to hear more from you guys about whether you think you can be the champions of change in your respective schools. And of course, अगर आपने कुछ और भी पूछना है तो आप panel से पूछ सकते हैं. Should we open up for questions? Is there a mic going round?
This is so unethical that I'm gonna ask the first question. I know this is very morally questionable, but I have a burning question. I think we have, those of us who've been in education for like the last maybe 2 decades, we've heard a lot about all of the various pieces of reform that are happening within teacher recruitment and teacher development. And so from the panel, I would love to know, because from the outside looking in on these policy reforms, sometimes it feels like we can't understand whether it's 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. Are we just kind of stuck in the same rut and just whirring our wheels, or are we actually making any progress? So I would love some thoughts on that. Okay, from a policy standpoint, as from the point of view of teacher recruitment, teacher development, teacher management, teacher governance, are we making any progress? Anywhere in Pakistan, actually.
Irfan sir, do you want to? Yeah.
देखिए, so I can talk on the basis of some of the work that I was part of in KP and in Punjab. I think the merit-based recruitment system, which started a couple years ago in KP, did represent some progress. Why do I say that? So in the KP, when we were there, we were regularly doing tests for the teachers as well. It was a teacher's need analysis, wasn't an assessment of their competencies, but it was also an assessment of their competencies, although done slightly indirectly. We could see a very clear difference between the teachers who were hired through the merit-based recruitment process after the merit-based recruitment policy, and the ones which were, more experienced but hired through other, on the basis of other policies. So there was clearly something which was done right, and so the subject matter knowledge, their ability to also absorb the new pedagogical kind of methods was also different, and I would say slightly better than the other teachers. So I think some of the teacher recruitment policies were making some difference. As far as teachers' professional development within the government is concerned, there's a lot to be said over there. I think there was some progress made, but as soon as you see some progress being made, things happen because of which you take 2 steps back. So you do take a step forward, but then you take 2 steps back, It all depends at times also on who is there at the top. So if you've got a good secretary, things will happen. Then you have to somehow do something to establish this on a sustainable basis. More often than not, that doesn't happen. So many good programs that were introduced in KP and also in Punjab, I'm talking specifically of professional development. If you look at them today, they're not as good, or not enough attention is being paid to keep them up in, the way they should be. Thank you.
So I would say that we struggle with this. We feel like we keep wanting to induct more teachers into the system, and we somehow are not able to. So recruitment is that pain point. And TFP is approaching it in a different way, and Durveen's approaching it in a different way. But I think it's worth examining, why is it such a pain point, Why aren't we able to recruit teachers into the system? And there's a couple of things that I just want to talk about that get down to bare bones basics. तुबा ने बोला आपको अगर साबुन बेचना है तब भी आपको एक जवाब चाहिए कि क्यों साबुन बेचना है, लेकिन कोई ये नहीं पूछेगा कि आपने क्यों साबुन नहीं बेचना. साबुन बेचना एक प्रेस्टिजियस एक्सेप्टेबल प्रोफेशन है जिससे आप एक बहुत कंफर्टेबल ज़िंदगी अपने लिए और अपनी फैमिली के लिए इस्टेब्लिश कर सकते हैं. क्या टीचिंग एक प्रेस्टिजियस प्रोफेशन है जिसके ज़रिए आप अपनी फैमिली के लिए एक अच्छी ज़िंदगी क्रिएट कर सकते हैं? I think we need to go back to basics and talk about this. What is the blockage? Are we paying teachers livable wages, which would make high quality graduates want to come into this profession? Are we making sure that teacher workloads are manageable and they're not on their feet for 6 hours a day dealing with 40 students at all times? Are we making sure their working conditions are comfortable, that they have bathrooms, that they have electricity, that they have cooling and heating, that they have comfortable chairs to sit on? Are we making sure that there's a narrative around teaching that makes people want to be a teacher? When we went into the teaching profession, I was having this conversation with some younger fellows as well. A lot of people are just like, why are you doing this? Tum to zaheen ho, tum to kabil ho, tum teaching mein kyun ja rahe ho? So I think first, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around narrative, around working conditions. We ask, what do teachers need to do? But fundamentally, are we asking, what do teachers need? And can they actually do this job in a comfortable way? So I would say we haven't made a lot of progress on the practicalities of what it means to be a teacher. We've made a lot of progress on defining quality standards, defining accountability measures. They're not perfect, but they're there. But we're not really talking about these basic things: workload, compensation, infrastructure, comfort, safety. And we're still asking teachers, okay, don't teach, aap polio drops ki campaign karwaएं, aap elections run kare, so what are we doing? I think we also need to start talking about these things and recognize that the wider infrastructure is probably what's something that's really stifling progress here.
Sorry, just in the interest of time, I want to move on to the next question, but I think that some of these themes will tie into what we talk about later as well. Irfan Sab and Rabia, I hope you don't mind. Sorry, Tuba and Rabia. There's a hand somewhere there.
Thank you. My name is Irfan and I work in the education sector. My question is that we all discussed at length that being conscious of what a student brings from home when they enter the school, like whatever their social status is, whatever the poverty, whatever the situation is. But I think what often doesn't make part of the discussion is what a teacher brings from home to the school also. We recognize that most of our teaching force is heavily women. The society in itself has quite a lot of other ills. There's gender-based violence, there's other massive kind of situations that women are going through in their own households, yet alone the burden of childbearing and child care for their own children, and then the responsibility of teaching in a school or an institution that often does not recognize other care facilities like maternity or other things that teachers also deserve. So I think one of the key things is what are the supporting elements that we can also think of for teachers in their own schools to have better policies, better health insurances, better requirements so they can function better and also deal with all what they bring from their homes to the school and possibly unwind before they get to interact with children and pass on any negativity if they're carrying with them because of that as well.
Tuba, can I just bring you in here because, at some level and scale, you are in the work of getting those teachers ready. What do you guys do to help them manage those different thought processes?
I think we touched upon this a little bit when Fatma was speaking, but I think it is first and foremost, we are bringing people with the right competencies for what the work is cut out to be. It's hard work. I've done many things over the last 14 years. Teaching is still one of the hardest things I've done. And if you want to do it well with 60 kids, with 50 kids, with various learning levels, it's hard work. And so first and foremost, I think the thing we try and do is bring in people with the right competencies, and then we work really, really, really hard to give them both the skills and then the support they need. I think the support piece that Fatma spoke about earlier in the panel we were talking about earlier, the heart, teaching, learning, kids, nurturing, these are matters of the heart also. And I think that all of you have a workplace. If you didn't have a manager over X many years of your life tell you, good job, how long would you be able to sustain your passion and so on and so forth, right? So our coaching model is central to what enables for our teachers, what we've learned over time, to do well, to grow, to thrive, to do well for their kids, but then also grow themselves. Because teaching is also something, particularly in the early years, that has a steep learning curve, and there's research upon that. So it's hard also to be a new teacher. So yeah, there's more things we can talk about, but I think the support piece and the coaching model, the world over, coaching is now one of the things that's recognized to be the most effective for teaching support. We're far from doing that in a way in Pakistan that actually gets teachers to be feeling supported. My fear about that is, it can't become another monitoring mechanism. And so for it to be really supportive, there's relational work involved there. I just want to leave it at that.
Rabia, can I just ask you to come in with some perspectives on that? You've been involved a little bit with AEOs, I think in Punjab, and you work with early childhood education contexts as well. What have been your learnings from some of those research environments?
So I think one of the things that's happening is that we're still talking at the teachers. We're talking at the head teachers. So to give you an example from a reform that Punjab introduced some time ago, which was the non-salary budget formula, which was designed to give head teachers more autonomy over how they spend for their school development and how much they spend. So to get rid of a lot of bureaucracy or money to show up in the school accounts. And this was meant to encourage sort of efficiencies and also more effectiveness in that the head teacher would simply have more autonomy to do what they wanted to do with the money that showed up in their development accounts. And one of the things that was found out was that this wasn't being spent. And immediately it was like, oh, the head teachers don't have the capacity to spend. And so, here's a reform that was designed, but it's not effectively being implemented. On speaking to some of the head teachers, it becomes clear that years and years previous of learned knowledge that they're going to get audited at the end of the day for what they spend and how they spend, and auditing was not necessarily a school-friendly or a head teacher-friendly process, was keeping head teachers from spending undertaking development expenditures in their schools. And it took a really long time and quite a lot of engagement to let them know that the previous audit rules were not applying or that they had more freedom now than they did before, which the reform itself had not designed to incorporate. So that behavior or that voice or that perception of the teachers about the new reform, even though it was introduced to bring about efficiency, etc., hadn't taken the head teachers themselves or how they perceived this reform or how they were interacting with this reform into account. So similar to that, whenever new reforms are introduced, the teachers, and I guess scale has something to do with this when it comes to the government sector, in particular in Pakistan, across different provinces. The teachers are almost the last ones. So the system struggles to channel voices of teachers, and mechanisms perhaps don't function effectively that allows us to understand how the teachers are even interacting with the reforms. So we're looking at what we're inputting, we're looking at whether the outputs are being received or not, but we're not necessarily looking at the process of how teachers or other grassroots level actors are interacting with the system. तो अगर आप AEOs की बात करते हैं और coaches की बात करते हैं, उनसे क्या वाकई बैठ के आप पूछ रहे हैं कि जो आप का रोल है वो है क्या, या जो आप टीचर से पूछ रहे हैं कि कोचिंग जो आपको मिल रही है वो किस तरीके से जा रही है. If that type of data is collected in piloting phases of new interventions, I don't know how far that makes it to the eventual. I don't see, either in my policy engagements or in the research that I read, the interactions of the actors with reform is never the main thesis of any analysis or a policy brief. And that to me links to the initial point about how we're imagining teachers as part of the system. So even सुबह से जो सुन रही हूँ मैं, मुझे यही समझ आ रही है कि स्टूडेंट्स को भी और टीचर्स को भी हम थोड़ा सा इंस्ट्रूमेंटली देखते हैं. आउटकम्स हमने डिफाइन कर ली हैं और आउटकम्स हमारे लिए इम्पोर्टेंट हैं, लेकिन वो जो इंडिविजुअल्स खुद हैं, जो वो स्टेक होल्डर्स खुद हैं, वो सिस्टम का हिस्सा कैसे हैं और कैसे फंक्शन कर रहे हैं. These are complex questions that might not all get reduced to measurable indicators. But research or evaluations at least tend to focus on very measurable indicators. They do not tend to, documenting experiences, documenting voices tends to be more complex. And requires methodologies that are complex and okay with complexity. So my experience has been that voices of these actors who we require to implement all the reform, all the practices, are not yet featuring in policy debates. I'll stop here. Policy discourse.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabia. I think, I'm sorry guys, we have unfortunately run out of time. I will just end by saying that I think दो चीज़ें बहुत वाज़ेह हुई हैं, just even from this very brief round of interaction, was कि जब तक टीचर की वॉइस सामने नहीं आएगी, चाहे वो आप लोग लेकर आएँ as some kind of agent or champion of change, या फिर I would say कि even researchers का भी इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा काम बनता है. Because जब तक आप असातिज़ा के साथ काम नहीं करेंगे और उनके ऊपर किताबें, papers, इस तरह की presentations नहीं लेकर आएंगे सामने, and then become that mechanism back into policy spaces, ताकि फिर आप दरवाजे खोलें कि असातिज़ा खुद आके फिर वो वेरीफाई करें जो बातें उन्होंने आपके साथ शेयर की हैं. I think that could be one way for Pakistan to start kind of getting the ball rolling on that important teacher voice, which is still missing very much from a lot of these decisions. Irfan Saab wanted to say something about professionalism. Sorry, Irfan Saab, we've run out of time. But I think most of what we've been saying does boil down to, do we even see teachers as a professional community? My final thought that I would want to leave everyone in the room with is we're often told कि इस मुल्क में एक इदारा है जिसके 7 लाख के करीब employees हैं, right? उसका नाम है पाकिस्तान की फ़ौज. We're also told कि जो federal service bureaucrats हैं वो almost 1.6 million के करीब अब इकट्ठे हो गए हैं. But guess how many teachers we have in Pakistan? Almost in excess of 2 million now, which is private and public combined. So the biggest community of employees in Pakistan is unfortunately treated so unprofessionally. Maybe it's time to raise a voice about whether we should look at that professional community for what it really is, and then take the conversation ahead from there. And I don't know if TFB is still here somewhere, but maybe the next conference should just be on teachers. That would be very cool. Thank you very much, panelists.
Thank you very much, panelists who are here, and Dr. Rabia, who joined us online. Thanks a lot. Before introducing our keynote speaker, आप लोग इतनी देर तस्वीर खिंचवा लें जितनी देर मैं announcement कर लेता हूँ. I think we must acknowledge that some of our guests have traveled quite a bit to be here with us today. We have our colleagues Janine and Khatija who work for Teach for Lebanon. They have joined us from Beirut. We have Reem Marto, who works in the MENA region in Teach for All. Our keynote topic is the missing piece, why leadership matters. And this keynote will be delivered by Ms. Wendy Kopp. She is the CEO and co-founder of Teach for All, a global network of independent organizations working to develop collective leadership to ensure all children have the opportunity to fulfill their potential. Prior to launching Teach for All, she founded and led Teach for America program. I request Ms. Wendy Kopp to kindly come and deliver her keynote speech.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very conscious of being this kind of post-lunch speaker. How are you all doing out there? Can everyone just stand up and take a deep breath and talk to your neighbor for I'm worried I'm going to lose you entirely if we don't do this. Stretch, jump up and down. Maybe one big collective shout out for collective leadership. Collective leadership. Okay, thanks you all. It is such a privilege to be here with you all. When I first came upon this idea that I proposed in my thesis that grew into Teach for America and ultimately Teach for All, I really could never have imagined that it would kind of propagate in 64 countries and growing. I would never have imagined that it would bring me here to Pakistan, where Khadija and team and supporters have truly created one of the jewels of our Teach for All network. Yes. When I got started in this work, I also really could not have imagined that this simple idea would end up creating and being such a critical source of collective leadership, or that collective leadership would turn out to be what I've come to think of as the missing piece in affecting system change in education. So I thought I would share a bit today about my journey towards those understandings, in the hope that kind of the lessons that I've learned along the way will help contribute to the conversation we're having here today and the kind of answers I think we're searching for through this day's panels. And hopefully in the process, it will also shed a little light on at least what I mean when I use the term collective leadership, and also on what it takes to develop collective leadership. So what inspired me initially was a very simple idea. And, you know, I was a college senior at the time, and the idea was simply that our generation should really put our energy against the inequities in our country. All the recruiters at the time were banks and consulting firms banging down the doors of liberal arts graduates like myself, asking us to commit just 2 years to work in their firms. And that led me to this simple idea. Why aren't we being recruited just as aggressively to commit just 2 years to teach in our urban and rural public schools? I had this thought that that would make a real difference for kids growing up today, and that there would be this longer term effect, that those 2 years would ultimately influence the values and the priorities of the participants. But I couldn't have understood just how significant that influence on their values and priorities would be. And I want to belabor this a bit, because I think this was the first kind of new insight along the way that really led me to realize that this idea was more than a simple idea, but was really something that could create what we've come to call collective leadership. So the moment where it first seemed that we might be onto something bigger than we'd realized was actually when people around the world started pioneering the development of this approach in their countries. And I say that because it became so striking that the leadership effects we had seen in the US, where people would commit just 2 years but never really leave the work, were happening everywhere. Like, no matter whether it was in Peru or India or Austria or the next place, we were seeing the same long-term effects and even the same data points. So people would come in and they would unsuspectingly commit just 2 years, but no matter what, it's like 75% of them would stay full-time, long-term in mission-related work. And that just seemed too surreal. So we started talking to researchers, and some researchers in particular in the political science department at Berkeley, who were very interested in this question of what shifts mindsets and beliefs in adults, what drives, for example, changes in civic engagement. And so they started doing a number of studies in various countries looking at what happens to people during those 2 years. And what they found were really significant effects. So this research is really interesting. It looks at people who are right on the admissions line to these organizations. So some people who barely get in and some people who barely don't. And it looks at what's different about those folks at that stage of admissions, and then what's different 2 years later and beyond. And so what this research shows is that they do show differences at this point of admissions, but those differences grow by a lot by 2 years later. So they show evolution on 5 different dimensions. So first of all, the participants come to believe even more in their students' potential. They come in, I mean, we're selecting the people who believe the most in the students we'll be working with in low-income communities, but that level of belief in the potential of kids and families and communities grows significantly. Their own self-efficacy grows, so their own sense of possibility that we can make a difference against this big problem. Their understanding of the nature of the problem and the solutions changes completely. Like, people come in thinking it's a technical fix. In fact, all around the world, the assessment at the point of admissions is funding is the #1 answer. And of course, funding's very important, but people come to realize it's much more complex and that there are a multitude of factors, that it's a big systemic issue that's going to require a lot of changes in mindsets, among other things, and significant adaptive change. Their priorities change, and in turn, career trajectories, and their networks grow with each other. So what we can see from reflecting on that research is that it's through those 2 years. It's not just that we're enlisting a bunch of people who might not otherwise have put their energy into this work. It's that those 2 years are shaping our participants into the collective leadership we need. People who believe in their students, who are deeply committed to ensuring that they have the opportunities they deserve, who have a sense of possibility, we can make a difference, who have the networks to work together. So what we saw over time was that there was a big explanation in all of that research for why we were seeing these efforts over time grow into what we came to call collective leadership, meaning people working at all levels of the system who are very diverse, so from different academic backgrounds and majors, from engineers to political science majors to education majors, people who've experienced the inequities we're addressing, people with much more privilege. We saw that they have networks with each other so that they collaborate and learn together, and that they're all on the same mission. Not because of a mission written on a piece of paper, but because of experience that builds their conviction that the current system is unjust and that all students have the potential to thrive. So the first thing we learned was that through intentional work, we can cultivate collective leadership. But what we've also seen over time is why this collective leadership is so important. As you all know, I think, the trajectory of educational outcomes in the world is not going in the right direction. The RISE study that people have mentioned so much today really shows that on average, over 30 years, if you look at the low and low to middle income countries in the world, educational outcomes have actually gone down in those 30 years. And it's not only in low and low to middle income countries, it's also in the most developed countries in the world. The OECD PISA report last year showed that we're in the midst of a 10-year decline. So this is worth stopping and thinking about, right? Because it is not for lack of trying. Think about all the money, the philanthropy, the government resources from the World Bank, the UNESCO, and everyone else, and governments, educators, people are pouring so much energy into education, and yet educational outcomes are going down. So we need to ask ourselves why that is. And this RISE research that people have cited so much throughout the day did exactly that. It tried to understand what is happening, and what is happening differently in the communities and the countries where educational outcomes are improving. The crux of the point, and people have been summarizing the RISE research in different ways today, but their essential conclusion was that we put most of our energy into doing a whole bunch of things in education that are absolutely crucial but are not sufficient. And those are things that they called the technical practices of education, meaning, the curriculum, the assessments, getting the buildings open, teacher training, a whole bunch of things that must be done, and they must be done well and in a way that is all aligned to a set of standards that we're working towards. That's all important, but they found many places that were working to do all of those things, but where the outcomes were not improving. So what is the X factor? And what their studies showed was that the X factor, as we've heard today, was a shared sense of purpose throughout the system towards the purpose of students learning. So they basically did all these, they did a whole analysis around where they would interview all the different actors in an educational ecosystem and ask what they thought was the purpose of education. And they found that there are many different purposes that drive people who put pressure on the educational ecosystem. And only some of those purposes are about the purpose of students learning and developing. And so what they showed was that where you had ecosystems where everyone, from the government officials to the parents and students to the teachers to the kind of NGOs in the picture, where everyone is on the same mission towards the mission of students learning and developing, that's when all those technical practices were done with intention and would add up to aggregate outcomes improving. So the RISE researchers, if you get them in a room and talk to them, say, well, there's a limitation of our research. And the limitation was that they kind of stopped there and didn't go on to say, what is it that produces that shared sense of purpose? I listened to all of this and thought, oh, we know. We know at least one thing that produces a shared sense of purpose. And that is this very intentional effort of ours to develop collective leadership, because we've seen it in communities all over the world, and we have this research that shows that enough of these people who are all on the same mission can add up to real progress. So that research gives us a clue that as to why collective leadership might be a key to system change. What I've also learned, though, along the way, which also substantiates this, is it's really come from teachers and alumni and others all over the world who know from their experience just how complex the issues are and just how many things will need to change if we're going to ensure that one day all kids really do have the chance to thrive. Think about all the things within the education system alone that would need to change, right? From our curriculum to how teachers are trained to how schools are set up to the state of technology. I mean, we could all go on. We could list 100 things before we even take a breath. And then you think about how much needs to change to just take the pressure off of schools in the first place, which are burdened by all of the challenges facing kids and families, especially the most marginalized kids and families in the world. So there's a lot that needs to be done, which just begs the question of who is going to do that. Ultimately, it's going to take all these actors in the ecosystem exercising agency and leadership, all on the same mission, working together if we're going to have any chance at actually moving aggregate outcomes in a sustainable way. I guess what led me over time to understand that enough intentional work to develop collective leadership does move aggregate outcomes is what I've seen in the communities in which we're working. I think back to my journey in the US, where Teach for America has now over time placed something like 70,000 people in 60 urban and rural communities in the country, but again, over many years, over 35 years. But I still remember vividly those early years where it seemed like we were up against just such enormous challenges, and we were starting to see bright spots, but they weren't adding up to aggregate progress. And I shared with some of the alumni yesterday that I still remember about year 15 when I was just thinking about this movement. We were still operating on this big idea that one day it was going to add up to aggregate progress, but we hadn't seen it yet. I kept thinking of ourselves as a movement of delayed gratification because we could see progress, right? Like we could point to literally hundreds of classrooms, not all of our classrooms, but hundreds of them where we were seeing really transformational results for kids. We saw many of those transformational teachers go on and start schools that are transformational. I'm sure you have transformational schools here in Pakistan that are showing that a totally different level of outcome is possible. We saw lots of other discrete efforts to try to take on changes in the teacher education system, in the curriculum, et cetera, but we weren't yet seeing it add up. And because I remember that reflection so clearly, thinking the next step is to see whole communities, not only whole classrooms and whole schools, but whole communities that are actually moving the needle for kids. It was striking, like 5-7 years later, to look around and realize that there were actually growing numbers of communities that were able to point to big jumps in things like high school graduation rates, like 20 to 30 point jumps that had been building over many years, where college going rates and proficiency levels were also going up. In fact, a few years ago, I read a report about the 8 urban areas in the US where we've seen really significant aggregate progress for kids, and realized that couldn't have even been written like a decade before, because we didn't have whole communities making aggregate progress for kids. And in each one of those places, Teach for America had placed hundreds of people who were not in every leadership role, but they were such a critical mass of change agents in those communities. In each one of those 8 places, they were between 10 and 30% of the school principals. They were running multiple departments in the district. In many cases, one of them was a superintendent of schools in that area. They were on the school board. They were running many, if not most, of the NGOs, and they were working in deep partnership with many others and kind of infusing their sense of possibility, their conviction, and their sense of purpose throughout the system. That would have been one thing if it was just in my country. But then we started seeing the same movie playing in other countries. I think you all know that the UK was the first, Teach First was the first adaptation of the Teach for America approach in the UK. And it started because there was such dissatisfaction with what was happening in London, where disadvantaged kids, economically disadvantaged kids, were just far behind more privileged kids. And so a group of business leaders in London said, we have to do something about it. And one of their ideas was to adapt this Teach for America approach. Well, 15 years later, the outcomes they achieved are pointed to now around the world as one of the examples that it is possible to have transformational change. Like, if you just look at the data points, you know, the economically disadvantaged kids are now better off than middle-income kids outside of London. They made really dramatic and very measurable gains. And again, if you took the Teach First teachers, the 6,000 of them who had been placed over time in London, out of the picture and the leaders they became, you would have taken away so much of the entrepreneurial energy and leadership that contributed to that change. Hundreds of them as teachers and middle leaders. In fact, 1,200 of them were in leadership roles within schools. About 120 as school principals, head teachers, and the rest in middle leadership roles. 50 of them working in government at every level and on both sides of the political aisle, some of them in research. They started 40 kind of game-changing NGOs. So not even there, but you start looking at the early organizations launching in different parts of the world, in Peru, in India, and you can see pockets, again, communities where we're seeing aggregate progress for kids, where it's just really hard to see how would it have happened if it weren't for this critical mass of change agents working throughout the ecosystem and exercising collective leadership. So I feel we're still very much on the early stages of this learning journey. Across Teach for All, we have a vision that within, I guess now 15 more years, we will see whole communities in every part of the world that are seeing this aggregate progress, that are providing all kids with the chance to have the kind of education and support and opportunity that it takes to shape a better future. And I'm really confident, based on everything I've seen over the last 12 years from Teach for Pakistan and its many allies, that at least one and probably more of those communities that will be shining the way for our whole global network will be here in Pakistan. So just sending you the biggest, warmest, most positive wishes in your effort to develop the collective leadership here that is necessary to ultimately contribute to system change. It is a long game. It is a long and messy game. At many points along the way, it may seem that it's not adding up to aggregate progress, but as that RISE research shows, the longer we wait to work to intentionally cultivate that collective leadership, the longer we defer the possibility of any real progress. So just sending you the best wishes in this learning journey, and I cannot wait alongside the rest of the Teach for All network to learn from you all's insights and progress along the way.
Ms. Wendy Kopp can go home and claim I had them up on their feet immediately, and that would be true. And I had them jump up and down, and that would be true as well. Thank you very much, Ms. Wendy Kopp, for this very insightful keynote address. At a concert once, some of us asked a rock star to do dhamal. And he said, I can do that, but know that after that, there's no concert. The concert ends at dhamal. There could be nothing after dhamal. So for our last panel discussion today, we kept the dhamal session for the end. And to lead this dhamal session, we will have our rockstar CEO, Khatija Bakhtiar, to come up on the stage, call her co-panelists and introduce them. And while she's doing that, let me embarrass her some more. She recently was conferred with an international award. By UC Berkeley. It is called Alice and Walter A. Haas International Award, and it is given to one alumna annually who must be from outside the US, and it is given in recognition of their track record of service to their country. So Khatija, congratulations, you've done us proud. Proceed.
Acceptance speech दोबारा करनी award वाली नहीं अच्छा नहीं Thank you very much, Rajil, for introducing this panel. I'm so grateful to Wendy for setting us up for this conversation. I think the first half of the day has been such an incredible and valuable, insightful exploration of what do we mean when we talk about a systemic approach to change. And now the second half of the day, I think, through Wendy's address, we're set up really well to explore one of the key ingredients that we believe is essential if we are serious about making this kind of systemic approach to change possible in Pakistan. And so I am so lucky to be joined today by 4 amazing panelists and a really rich and diverse array of experiences and insight. And so I want to welcome, first of all, he's a board member, but much more than that, I'm so honored to call him a mentor and a friend. Dr. Faisal Wari, can we have you back up on stage, please? We're also joined by Amna Akhtar, who is an alum of the Teach for Pakistan program, and she is also the manager of monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning. Wow, that's a lot, Amna. At the United Nations Development Program, she looks after the very, very interesting MAGP program. We are very lucky to have with us today somebody who one of the first female role models within education when I got started, and has been full of kindness and compassion to people like me since then. And so Mehnaz Appa, you need no introduction, but former parliamentarian, she's a development practitioner, she's an activist, many, many labels can go here. Mehnaz Appa, please join us. And finally, we are so lucky to have another Teach for CEO in the room, the head of the Teach for Lebanon program. It's a sister program to ours. Janine, will you please join us on stage? Thank you. Okay. So, we've talked and we've heard a little bit from Wendy, and I think we talked about it over the course of the day a little bit, about this idea of leadership and how central it is to any kind of change process. I want to kick off this discussion. I want to get right into it. I don't think more of a preamble is needed. And I'll go to you, Faisal, because I know that you have taught, written about this a lot. When we talk about leadership in the context of Pakistan, can you demystify this idea for us a little bit? What is this leadership that we need to move our systems forward? At what levels do we need those leaders? What do we need them to be doing?
Maybe we'll end up mystifying it more rather than demystifying it. So if you look at leadership literature, you can find almost everything and anything in it. It's like a leader has to be the Nietzschean Superman and everything in between. Super person, pardon me. And it's true, literature will talk about all of those aspects, I think. But when I think about leadership, the way I see it in Pakistan, the way it works, I think it boils down to 4 or 5 major aspects that need to be taken into account. I don't think there's any question that competence has to be there. You have to be competent at whatever you are doing, whether you're teaching. And so to begin with, it can be at any level. It doesn't matter what level. So you asked about level. Level doesn't matter, whether you're a teacher, whether you're head teacher or above in the system, or whether you're just a person thinking about issues of leadership. The competence has to be there. You have to have comfort with whatever you're doing, whether in class or in school and so on. That competence, not only in just the material that you have, but in how you present it, deliver it, how you do the work in any organization that you're in. With the competence, there has to be a very strong structure. I think you have to have comfort with yourself as a person as well. It's very important to develop that comfort of who you are, very comfortable with opening up to others in terms of learning, in terms of acknowledging each of us are always learning all the time. We don't have all the answers. We have to be open enough to openly acknowledge that. And I know a lot of people are very reluctant to say, I don't know, but I find that to be an essential part of being human, that you make mistakes and you also say, I don't know. So that comfort level has to come with being, otherwise you're not able to connect with others. There has to be a very strong core of ethical morality, clarity on that. What is it that you stand for in terms of your ethical principles? What are the issues that you really hold dear as a person in terms of your ethical makeup? That clarity has to be there as well. Your purpose. सुबह से हम पर्पस की बात कर रहे हैं ना, वो पर्पस की क्लैरिटी बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट है अगर आपने लीडरशिप के बारे में सोचना है कि भाई आप करना क्यों चाहते हैं, क्या करना चाह रहे हैं, उसकी क्लैरिटी बहुत ज़रूरी। बट सबसे जो मेरे ख्याल में बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पॉर्टेंट है ना, वो है दिस एबिलिटी, और ये मैं दोनों चीज़ें, टू टेक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी एंड टू टेक रिस्क। और वो रिस्क देखें, एक जो पर्पस से मैं कनेक्ट कर रहा हूँ वो बड़ा सिंपल बात ये है कि पर्पस कांट भी कि मैं अमीर हो जाऊँ, मैं बहुत ज़्यादा अचीव करूँ, मैं पे नहीं है पर्पस। पर्पस जो है वो आपसे बहुत बड़ा होता है। पर्पस जो है वो ये है कि भाई चाहे वो क्लास की डिलीवरी है, बच्चों का फ्यूचर, बच्चों की लर्निंग है, स्कूल है, सिस्टम है, या कैसे मैंने दूसरों के साथ इंटरैक्ट करना है. सो वो पर्पस हमेशा आपकी पर्सनालिटी से बड़ा होगा, और वो जब पर्पस वहाँ आएगा तो उसके लिए फिर आपको रिस्पॉन्सिबल भी होना पड़ेगा, और आपको उसके लिए एथिकली काम भी करना पड़ेगा और रिस्क भी लेना पड़ेगा. ये लीडरशिप की एसेंशियल क्वालिटीज़ हैं. इसके बगैर, चाहे आप टीचर हैं, देखिए टीचर, सुबह से हम बात कर रहे हैं कि आज खड़े होके हम माजी में पढ़े हुए फ्यूचर के लोग तैयार कर रहे होते हैं. I mean, इसमें बड़ी कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन है विद द इशू ऑफ नेटैलिटी एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट कम्स इन, कि भाई कल का हमें पता नहीं है. पिछले कल में हम तैयार हुए थे खुद, और हम कल के बच्चों को तैयार करने की आज कोशिश कर रहे हैं. The uncertainty is going to be very high. Where do you get your certitude from, or your at least वो खंबा जिसे आप पकड़ें, वो आता है आपकी ethical values से. You're taking responsibility for that, and then you act forward, taking the risk, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you as well. So वो ये जो sense of responsibility और connection है, that's what makes you leader. It's never about you. It's never एक आदमी की बात हो ही नहीं रही. लीडरशिप ज़ाहिर है एक आदमी के वो चीज़ तो सिर्फ अपने बारे में हो सकती है ना. जब आप लीडरशिप कहते हैं तो किसी के साथ काम करेंगे तो फिर ही लीडरशिप के का मायने आएगा. तो ये सारी क्वालिटीज़, और ये ऐसी नहीं है जो एक किस्म से आपसे सोचें, ये शायद अच्छे इंसान होने की भी क्वालिटीज़ हैं. इसमें थोड़ा ही फ़र्क होगा. अच्छा इंसान भी एथिकल होना चाहिए, अच्छा इंसान भी पर्पस ड्रिवन ज़्यादातर हैं. थोड़े बहुत फ़र्क होंगे, लेकिन वो सारी क्वालिटीज़ उसमें यही आती हैं. एंड दैट्स व्हाट आई थिंक पाकिस्तान में ये लीडरशिप इस तरह से सोचना चाहिए. और इट्स मेरे ख़्याल में तो ये बहुत आसान है डेवलप करना, लेकिन हमें बड़ा ऐसे किया जाता है कि इनमें से बहुत सारे एलिमेंट हम आने ही नहीं देते. सेंस ऑफ रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, सेंस ओबीडियंस का बहुत ज़्यादा, रादर देन रिस्क टेकिंग, बगैर सोचे समझे हाँ कह देना, किसी के साथ चल पड़ना, पूरी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी खुद नहीं लेना. एथिक्स की डेवलपमेंट, बच्चे को हम बड़ी देर तक इंडिपेंडेंट नहीं होने देते. वो सेंस ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस और जो रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी उसकी बनती है वो डेवलप. तो वो सारी चीज़ें थोड़ा सा वक्त चाहिए, मुश्किल थोड़ा सा होता है कि किस वक्त आएंगी वो. लेकिन ये बाय मिड, my presumption is by the time people graduate, which is why I think the undergrad years are very important, by 18 से 22, वहाँ बहुत सारी चीज़ें ये क्लैरिटी हो जानी चाहिए, ताकि by the time वो आपके पास आते हैं और so they are ready to take that step towards leadership. Maybe I can stop here and we can come back to it.
Amna, आप जो merged areas governance project देख रही हैं UNDP में पिछले कुछ अरसे से, एक बहुत मैसिव अंडरटेकिंग है. उसका स्कोप बहुत बड़ा है, रीजन बहुत कम्प्लेक्स है, उसकी हिस्ट्री बहुत कम्प्लेक्स है. इस तरह के काम के अंदर आप लीडरशिप के आइडिया की क्या वैल्यू देखती हैं या नहीं देखती? When you're trying to achieve what this project is trying to achieve, what role does the individual leadership of people and how that individual leadership comes together, what is the role that can potentially play?
Sure. Thank you, Khadija. I think in some ways, because the project or UNDP is a massive undertaking. You think about big structures, and we talk about leadership. It's a grandiose idea, but at the end of the day, I think leadership is at the core of probably what the fellows do every day, and similarly what we try to do every day. And I think over the years, what I've seen, and if I just take stock of the various manifestations of leadership, I think it's about making the problem, simplifying the problem, right? So it's not about having all the right answers or coming up with new innovative ideas. Sure, all of those are aspects of how leadership comes about, but for me, I think it's really understanding the problem and breaking it down, simplifying it, and bringing sort of people around it. So it's not that it's an untackleable problem, it's not that it's insurmountable, but leadership really comes from being able to see beyond the problem and breaking it down. So in the context of The project that I'm a part of currently, it's a huge undertaking, hundreds of people work on it. And just for people who don't have context, this is part of Pakistan that is, hasn't been part of the formal governance systems or wasn't part of the constitutional authority until 2018. So it's largely been what's called ungoverned. And this is the tribal belt. So there's a lot of, again, ideas about the people that exist there, or how difficult or untacklable those people are, and how can you bring them in the fold of formal governance systems. But in the end, I think if you think about, really thinking about like, what does that mean? You don't have to go in and come up with the solutions for themselves, right? It's about understanding and breaking down the problem itself. So leadership really comes in small forms where it comes from the people within. And you don't need to have the answers to that. It's really just about, okay, let's understand the problem. Let's have our ear to the ground, try and understand what the issue is. And in a lot of cases, it's about, well, like bridging that gap. So particularly for, I think we saw that in our schools, in our classrooms, it was the gap between the school administration, the parents, the teachers. Here, very similarly, it's the gap between the state and the people. And where each, in their own respect, is trying to create a solution, but they're not speaking to each other. So leadership really isn't about you going and sort of, manifesting and creating solutions. It's really about perhaps building those bridges or trying to understand that maybe these are the gaps that you need to fill, or the levers that you need to pull to maybe bring it together. And in some essence, simplifying the problem, because sure, it appears as, huge learning deficits or, very poor human development outcomes, but at the end of the day, the root cause is coming from sort of this information asymmetry, you may call it, or a gap between different systems. So one aspect I just think of leadership is really bringing that together. And again, I think the last point I will make is it's not about sort of being, having the formal authority or the space to be a leader. I think it's really actually, you see leadership emerging where you wouldn't normally expect it, or actually I think that's where you have more power per se, where you actually don't have the formal authority. I think we've seen that so much. I think fellows can probably attest to that. We saw that every day in our classrooms. We saw that with the parents. But here also, I see that every day in just about, and I think, UNDP may want to take credit for some of this, but the end of the day, if there are any sort of progress being made, in the region, it's really coming from the people themselves. And I'll just sort of, a very small example of that would be, so for decades, like this region sort of, because hasn't been part of the formal governance systems, hasn't had access to electricity, but also has no concept of paying for a service. It's considered a right, because that's how it's been for many, many years. And so now when state institutions come in and try and establish some of those systems, there's a resistance. And it's really just what I said about bridging that gap, that deficit, that state deficit, and the people deficit, and so it was a small pilot we ran, now cut to the point where you have a system where a small group of village councils have come together. You just provided an impetus of maybe a few solar panels. And now they have come together to run it in a way that, all right, a certain set of houses get solar panels this year. They contribute and create a running fund, which will then be used to power the next set of houses in the next year, and so on and so forth. And so in some ways, they realize that it will take a really long time for the state to bring them on the grid. So let's try and create something that we can do for ourselves. I feel like this is the role of leadership, and it didn't necessarily come from the formal organization itself, but it came from the people. But again, it was about bridging that deficit of, well, paying for electricity is not a the end of all, and sort of you take it from there. So I don't know, I'll end it here for now, but that's just one aspect of leadership for me.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I think it's really helpful to start to unpack, this word leadership as such a, it sometimes feels like a really opaque term. Sometimes it feels like an oversimplification. And so I think it's really helpful to start to unpack kind of what it needs to look like, particularly in our context, and the examples are helpful. Janine, I want to ask you, I think for countries like Pakistan, like Lebanon, one of the things that we kind of find in our discourse is often that, we don't have the luxury to wait to invest in things like the leadership capacity of people who are going to run systems. Those are long-term things. Their payoffs are too far off in the future, and so we must always be operating in crisis mode and see what we need to get to today. And and that's just. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it feels like we've just never come out of that crisis mode. So I think my question to you is, in contexts like ours, then, where there is instability, where there is uncertainty, is there any point in talking about developing future leadership? What would you say about that?
Thank you, Khadija. Is there any point in investing in leaders because it takes so much more time than investing in a building, in a school, in devices which you can touch, which you can see, which are there? All of this doesn't constitute a school, right? A building is not a school. A school or a building without teachers who are not only teaching skills, that's not a place I call school. I want to ask you, who of you had a teacher who really inspired you, who moved the needle, who said, maybe school is not so bad after all? Who of you had that inspiring teacher? Okay, I do see some hands, and I believe that when you went through the program, and so many of you are alumni, that you are this kind of person for the children which you have taught, for the children you are still teaching, for the children you are going to interact with in the future. And I feel this is where change happens. This is the very slow process of investing in each other, in our own growth, and it takes so much time. There are no rapid solutions. Do I see this happening in Lebanon, was the question? We have so much aid coming in at the moment because we are just coming out of a war, and we are really world-class in crisis. So we had an economic crisis, we had a currency crisis, we had a teacher crisis, we had an explosion at the port, we had COVID like everyone else, so I don't want to go in all of these details. But if you look at this, no, the reflex is not let's invest in the development of us as people. The development is focused primarily on what can we do quickly, which building can we build, which school can we rehabilitate, and it's really, really missing the investment in the hearts, which is why I am so convinced about what we are doing all over the world. We are running our programs, we are investing in our fellows, and they constitute at the end the change agents we want to see. And I hope we are reaching at one point the critical mass. We started very slow because of all the problems I have just mentioned. Meanwhile, we have used the opportunity to grow in crisis, which basically means that we have 7 times more fellows than 2 years ago. We have 4 times the budget we had 2 years ago, and we are most of all reaching many more children. We used to reach 3,000 children a year, now we are reaching 10,000 children a year, and we have formed partnerships with big organizations, and together we are reaching 80,000 kids in 1 year. So, yeah. Thank you.
And Azapa, I'll come to you. आपका एक्सपीरियंस इतना वास्ट है, आपने मेरे ख्याल है शायद हर वैंटेज पॉइंट से तालीमी निज़ाम को नहीं, हमारे ब्रॉडर पॉलिटिकल सोशल निज़ाम को भी स्टडी किया है, उसके साथ काम भी किया है. तो आपसे मैं पूछना चाहूँगी कि हम जिस चीज़ की बात कर रहे हैं कि हमारे सिस्टम्स के हर लेवल पे, हर रंग के ऊपर ऐसे लोग हों जो इतनी रिसोर्सफुलनेस से इंडिपेंडेंटली अच्छे फ़ैसले लें, दूसरों के साथ मिलके काम करें, और पर्पस ओरिएंटेड हों अपने जहन में, और वो एक एसेंशियल चीज़ है जो हमारे सिस्टम्स को आगे मूव फॉरवर्ड करेगी. आपके एक्सपीरियंस में आपने ये होता हुआ देखा है? डू वी फाइंड दिस लीडरशिप इन आवर सिस्टम्स एट एनी लेवल?
थैंक यू सो मच. सबसे पहले तो मैं आई वुड लाइक टू थैंक खतीजा. अब हमारा रोल थोड़ा सा रिवर्स हो गया है. मैं खतीजा की मेंटोर नहीं रही, खतीजा मेरी मेंटोर हो गई है. दैट्स द लर्निंग. And secondly, for a long time, I haven't seen so many education leaders together in a room, so I'm very, very excited. अब नाम सब आप लोग, कसूरी साहब भी बैठे हुए, वेंडी है, मुजफ्फर साहब है, so and many others who I don't know. मैं थोड़ी सी बात करूँगी कि सबका इकट्ठे होके काम करने का कितना अहम है इस वक्त ये कॉन्फ्रेंस होना, और कितना अहम है the model, the Teach for Pakistan model is such an important model and implementation vehicle because it's creating the fellows. They are the education leaders. I had a short conversation with Khatija yesterday, and we just thought, and we were agreeing that we don't find that level of leadership. थोड़ा सा मैं इसको अनपैक करूँगी और मैं आपको अपना एक्सपीरियंस बताऊँगी जो आपको इंटरेस्टिंग लगेगा. और कि मैं एनजीओ और एजुकेशन, चिल्ड्रंस ग्लोबल नेटवर्क मेरा एनजीओ था, परवान उसका एक बहुत अच्छा प्रोजेक्ट था, उसको भी रिवाइव करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. सो उसमें से फिर जब पार्लियामेंट में ख़वातीन आती हैं, कुछ तो वो रिज़र्व सीट में आ जाती हैं, कुछ आती हैं जनरल सीट में. जनरल सीट में जो आती हैं जीत के, वो हमेशा एक्सीडेंटल होता है. आदमी तो कभी इजाज़त मतलब नहीं, वो मेरा भी एक्सीडेंटल हो गया. मियाँ जो था वो डिस्क्वालीफाई हो गया, तो मेरा तो मौका लग गया. अच्छा, तो एजुकेशन में काम करने वाली, अर्ली चाइल्डहुड एजुकेशन, आपकी तरह के प्रोजेक्ट्स को देखना, फिर वो जो आपने मोबिलाइजेशन की बात की वो करना, NRSP का भी एक्सपीरियंस था, और पूरे पाकिस्तान में काम करने का एक्सपीरियंस था. तो दैट कॉन्स्टिट्यूंसी वाज नॉट माइन. जिस कॉन्स्टिट्यूंसी में जीत के आई, ना वो इलेक्शन मेरा था ना वो मैंने, खैर वो एक अलग. तो मैं वहाँ से बात शुरू करूँगी कि जब हम लीडर की बात कर रहे हैं और जब हम एजुकेशन के लीडर की बात कर रहे हैं, तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल व्हाट इज़ द पे ऑफ, व्हाट इज़ the return to working with children? That is a big question mark. Is it recognized? Who is recognizing it? When you become the leader के ओहो ये तो बड़ा लीडर है, ये तो अपने आप को बड़ा कुछ समझता है, इसको तो लोग मानते हैं. सो एजुकेशन लीडर को कौन मान रहा है? ये मैंने जाके पार्लियामेंट में रियलाइज़ किया कि एजुकेशन लीडर को बड़े कम लोग मान रहे हैं. ठीक है. दूसरी बात ये है, और फिर एजुकेशन लीडर में बनने के लिए क्या फ़ायदा है आपके लेवल पे भी और पार्लियामेंट के लेवल पे भी, सिविल सोसाइटी के लेवल पे, पेरेंट्स के लेवल पे, टीचर्स के लेवल पे. वो अभी मैं बताऊंगी आपको, प्रॉब्लम नहीं बताऊंगी, सोल्यूशन भी बताऊंगी आपको जो मेरे एक्सपीरियंस से सोल्यूशन है. सो हियर आई एम, आई लैंड इन द पार्लियामेंट एंड आई लुक हियर एंड देयर. सारे लोग तकरीर कर रहे हैं जो कि एपिटमी है लीडरशिप की, जिसको कि हम वोट करके लेके आते हैं एंड नॉट सो वोट करके लेके आते हैं. बीच में वोट चोरी भी हो जाता है. तो लेकिन ये है कि फिर मानना पड़ता है ना लीडर, क्योंकि पैसा उनके हाथ में, फैसले उनके हाथ में. जो कुछ भी, जो ज़्यादातर बच्चे हमारे पब्लिक स्कूल्स में जा रहे हैं, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में जा रहे हैं, वो तो उनके हाथ में, उन्होंने 2-3 बटन दबाने, उन्होंने, और जो द ब्यूरोक्रेट्स दैट देयर आर. So the decision making is in the hands of the political leadership, the member of National Assembly, the provincial assemblies. So what happens inside the National Assembly, I'll tell you. Nobody wants to talk about children under 18, because 18 is the age when you start voting. So there is a youth, there is a youth committee, caucus. So उसमें youth आएंगे और उसमें यही बात होगी. The political parties are then talking about, the voters and the potential and the social media campaigns and all this kind of thing. No schooling. And then when you talk of schooling, they say, oh, only Islamabad capital territory we can talk about. The other rest has gone to the provinces. So 18th Amendment has also created problems. लेकिन हम उसकी बात नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि हम इतनी बात नहीं कर सकते. So जब मैं वहाँ गई तो मैं सियासी तकरीर नहीं कर सकती थी और ना मेरा दिल चाहता था, because I had such a lot of experience of working in education. इज़्ज़त भी बड़ी थी. अब मेरे लिए इज़्ज़त कोई और चीज़ है, किसी और सियासतदान के लिए इज़्ज़त कोई और चीज़ है. मैंने कहा टीवी पे मैंने नहीं आना, मैं सिर्फ एजुकेशन की बात करूँगी या वेमेन राइट की या चाइल्ड राइट्स की बात करूँगी. खैर वो होते होते फिर मुझे मेरी कुछ सहेलियाँ, चंद नफीसा शाह, नाज बलोच वगैरह, कुछ अक्लमंद से जो थे MNAs, उन्होंने मुझे कहा जो आपका ब्रांड है वो आप सेल करें ना, एजुकेशन राइट्स. तो उसमें फिर मैंने ये किया कि सबसे पहले, सो देर इज़ रूम इफ़ यू वांट टू बी, और वही चीज़ आप अप्लाई कर सकते हैं अपने आप. व्हेन वेंडी वाज डूइंग हर कीनोट, I was just thinking of that, she's talking about the fellows as leaders, and this can be just picked up and applied to the parliamentarians as leaders and civil society leadership. Anyone who wants to be an educational leader, the teachers. I met so many. Let me give you an example, totally out of context here, but अभी एक मुस्लिम गर्ल चाइल्ड की एजुकेशन की कॉन्फ्रेंस हो रही थी इस्लामाबाद में. So the teachers from the Federal Directorate of Education schools that I worked with, training them in interactive teaching and learning, now are principals. And they are, because we were able to work with them, and now I see that they are such leaders and they're running such great schools. People they're clamoring to get their children into these schools. So leader तो कहीं पर भी बैठा जा सकता है. So coming back to the parliament, so I was part of that committee on education. बात क्या होती थी वहाँ पर? आप जैसे प्रोग्राम तो आप लोग जाते ही नहीं वहाँ पर. मेरा गिला आपसे है. आप लोग नहीं जाते. खतीजा आप भी नहीं जाती पार्लियामेंट. आप लोग भी नहीं जाते. कसूरी साहब आप भी नहीं जाते. मतलब वो ये होता है कि जी वहाँ पर तो किस्सा ख़राब कर देंगे या हमें फंसा देंगे. हमें ज़रूरत क्या है? प्राइवेट सेक्टर कहता है हमें ज़रूरत क्या है? आप भी कम जाते हैं, आप दिखाई में ज़्यादा हैं, हम पढ़ते हैं आपको, ठीक है ना. सो उसमें ये है कि भाई आएँ तो सही. कमेटी का देखें, कमेटी कर क्या रही है. कमेटी सिर्फ पोस्टिंग ट्रांसफ़र्स की बात कर रही है, कमेटी सिर्फ पेंशन्स की बात कर रही है, कमेटी सिर्फ यूनिवर्सिटीज़ के चार्टर की बात कर रही है जहाँ आप पैसा बना सकते हैं, या डे टू डे. क्यों? अच्छा, जब बात हो रही है रोज़मर्रा बात हो रही है एजुकेशन प्रॉब्लम्स की, तो वहाँ रोज़मर्रा बात हो रही है सियासी प्रॉब्लम्स की या मुल्क के प्रॉब्लम्स की, तो जो लोग हैं जो बहुत अपने कॉन्स्टिट्यूंसी के लीडर्स हैं, बड़े कमिटेड लोग हैं, एजुकेशन की बात नहीं करेंगे. अगर मैं उठ के एजुकेशन की बात करूँगी तो सब मुझे यूँ करके देखेंगे. सो मुझे फिर वो चूज़ करते थे हर चीज़ में एजुकेशन की बात करने के लिए. मैंने फिर प्राइवेट मेंबर के तौर पे 4 साल लगा के प्रोहिबिशन ऑफ कॉर्पोरल पनिशमेंट का बिल पास कराया. अब मैं जिम्मेदारी आज आपको और खतीजा को दे के जाऊँगी क्योंकि उसकी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन नहीं हो रही. फिर मैंने दूसरा बिल पास कराया, प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ डोमेस्टिक वर्कर्स, कि 14 साल से कम का बच्चा उधर काम ना करे. फिर तीसरा बिल पास कराया, प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ चिल्ड्रन इन साइबर क्राइम्स. ये जो सारी ग्रूमिंग होती है, ये डार्क जो सब कुछ होता है, चाइल्ड राइट्स की बात हुई. अच्छा, फिर मैं आपको एक बात बताऊं. थैंक यू सो मच. 50 इयर्स ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मनाया जा रहा था कि हमारी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के आइन के 50 साल ना, तो उसमें मुख्तलिफ लोग आ रहे थे, मुख्तलिफ कम्युनिटीज़ इकट्ठी हो रही थी. ख़वातीन का किसी दिन कट हो रहा था, किसी दिन जलसा किसी और का हो रहा था. तो मैंने कहा बच्चों को बुलाएं. अच्छा, बच्चे आए तो उन्होंने कहा आपके पास तो चाइल्ड राइट्स कॉकस नहीं है. और मैं भी उस चीज़ को 3 साल से उधर, तो इतना मनाना पड़ता है, लेकिन लोग मान जाते हैं. सबसे जो मैंने बात देखी कि लोग मान जाते हैं, स्पीकर साहब मान जाते हैं. PTI के ज़माने में मैं PMLN के प्लेटफॉर्म से थी क्योंकि मेरे हस्बैंड का वो प्लेटफॉर्म था. तो I was able to, convince the speaker then for the bills that I passed, and all the parties supported me. So इसमें बात ये है, अच्छा अब हम कहाँ जाते हैं, अब बात को थोड़ा सा समेटते हैं. So what next? अब मैंने आपको बताया कि पार्लियामेंट में क्या होता है, and there is a lot of room for influence. मीडिया, अब मैंने पार्लियामेंट की इतनी बात की, मीडिया का टाइम नहीं है, लेकिन मीडिया में भी अगर आप लोग पुश करते रहें, मीडिया कैन इन्फ्लुएंस द पार्लियामेंट, मीडिया कैन इन्फ्लुएंस द पॉलिसी मेकर्स, मीडिया कैन इन्फ्लुएंस द प्रोविंसेस. अब ये इतनी बड़ी सक्सेस स्टोरी है. आई वांट टू सी द मीडिया स्प्लैश्ड विद दिस सक्सेस स्टोरी ऑफ सो मेनी ऑफ यू द फेलोज दैट आर इन्फ्लुएंसिंग आवर एजुकेशन सिस्टम. मगर पॉलिटिक्स में जाके आई गॉट टू नो द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ मीडिया, कि जिस दिन मीडिया में बड़ी खबर लग जाए, अगले दिन लोग जल्दी जल्दी अपने फैसले बदल रहे होते हैं. सो वो बहुत ज़रूरी है. अच्छा, दूसरी चीज़ जो बहुत अहम है वो ये है, आप लोग जो काम कर रहे हैं, अब आप इतने लोग हैं, देखिए कोई भी चीज़, वॉट एवर यू वॉन्ट टू चेंज, लीडर का काम है टू बी अ चेंज मेकर, टू फैसिलिटेट, टू रिप्रेजेंट आइदर टू 2 से लेके 2 लाख, 20 लाख या पूरा पाकिस्तान. दैट इज़ अ लीडर, राइट? दैट people are convinced that you are a leader, and then you are able to translate the needs of people, children, parents, teacher, to the policy making, or just a change, better education at the school level, or more finances, or better curriculum at the parliamentary level, right? Uske liye kya zarurat hai of you all coming together? What I have been missing in the last maybe 6-7 years, it's a long time, is a concerted effort of pushing for better quality education, equity in education, realizing what is, like what Faisal said, that we are training children for tomorrow. AI आ गया, cheating करना बड़ी आसान हो गई है, smartphone है, पढ़ना बहुत मुश्किल हो गया है. So I am from, all of you are, everybody is younger, let's say, but नज़र आ रहा है. But coming back to you all, we all need to join hands and know where to push buttons, and each of us is recognizing each other. We don't need state recognition, we don't need a tamgha for being that leader. We just need to know ourselves that this is what I've done to be in a role where I have changed some lives, and come together to influence a larger spectrum of things, like the country, like a city, etc. What Teach for Pakistan is doing. Thank you.
Faisal, one question I have. I think what we just heard from Anala was such a valuable perspective on. Thank you. मेरी टीम का रोब मुझ पे ही चलता है. Thank you. I just got a time check. So I will ask this question though. I'll cut to the chase. Within education development, the one conversation that we don't seem to have very often, or correct me if I'm wrong on this, it feels like we don't have that very often within our education discourse, is in the realm of education governance. Where is the thinking on this? That we need to cultivate an entire generation of people who can run our systems, right? Why is this not even a conversation in our discourse, in our development discourse?
I think in general, we have always undersold this idea of leadership and getting the right people in the right places. We think of governance as almost automatic, that you say things and they will happen. Whereas there's a lot of research now on frontline bureaucrats, all the way up to the secretaries and so on, how every piece of the puzzle is very important to make the whole thing work. Right, so there's very good work. There was the Delhi experiment on transforming schools, which was studied by an entire team of researchers working with the change agents to see how change happened. And there it was very clearly documented that many of the bureaucrats also felt that they were just post offices, that they were taking orders from one place and delivering it to another. And it went all the way down to the teacher, right? So the minister would come and give a lecture, or the secretary would come and give a lecture, do the change, we are all for change, let's focus on learning, let's forget this completion of curriculum and so on, but focus on learning of children and so on. But as soon as the secretary would leave and the minister would leave, the teachers would say to the bureaucrats, but you're going to hold us responsible for delivering of curriculum. You're going to hold us responsible for crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, and you're not going to worry about what was being said by the minister, etc. Right? So this entire system needs to be thought through right from the minister, that issue of what we discussed in the morning about purpose and alignment around that purpose, but then each person buying into that purpose and alignment also, which has also been talked about. So एक तो इसका aspect वो है कि वो कैसे करें. How do you get that right? We have some studies that have shown, for example, the mission orientation for when Kennedy had decided that by the end of the decade we'll be on the moon. There's a very nice book by an economist about how that focused what NASA was doing, and there was tremendous mission sort of alignment throughout, to the point where somebody who was cleaning the floor in NASA, when asked, what are you doing here? They said, well, we are working on getting a person to the moon. They weren't saying we were cleaning the floor. They were saying we were working here to get a person on the moon, right? That kind of, actually, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, long ago we had done a study called WWW, not the Wrestling Federation. It was called What Works and Why. And there we had found, so everyone was saying, this is after the LEAP study that was mentioned earlier also, everyone was saying that public system is collapsed, is a failure, etc. And what we did, there was 3-4 researchers, Irfan Muzaffar Saab is here, we were part of the same team. We went around the country to look for public sector schools that were still working in this large system of failure, or whatever you want to call them. And we found the schools. But inevitably, every school that we found that worked, and you can tell a school that it works or not by going into it and spending 15 minutes looking at the teachers and the children and what they are doing and how interested they are. You can tell whether a school works or not to a certain extent. Every school that we looked at in detail that worked, there was someone, at least one person, if not more, usually the head teacher, but sometimes an outside community person, sometimes a teacher, who took the responsibility beyond their call of duty to worry about the school, to really advocate for the school, to push for the school, to say that this is where I want to sort of push for change, and so on and so forth, right? And we had one head teacher that was known in her area as Madam Jangi, because she would fight for the school very hard to get things done for the school. We had one head teacher in Sawabi who the people in that village refused to get transferred out of the village for the last 25, 30 years, because she had educated generations of girls in that school. And here's the ultimate compliment. When we asked some of the girls about, what they wanted to be, etc., many of them said they wanted to grow up and be like their teacher, right? What could be so that's we don't give enough attention to that kind of notion of leadership, where people take responsibility and start worrying about what the school and the institution they had. So I'm putting these two together, that this is what we have to do, a mission alignment, but with tremendous, these people, growing these people, making these, creating these people who will worry about education and take that responsibility way beyond the call of duty.
Yeah, and at some points it really feels surreal, because we have a whole panel discussion where we're talking about this, but at its simplest and its most beautiful, I think that's what leadership looks like, right? You care about something, it hurts you, and you go above and beyond, right? And so I know that we are very, very short on time, so I'm going to just do a whirlwind round, because I do want to take the leverage this experience and insight that we have with us right now to answer one question. What is the one thing that we can do to create more space for passionate, purpose-driven people to actually exert leadership within our systems? Because that, I think, also has been a big question for Pakistan. A lot of things are very top-down. A lot of people who work within the system, it feels like they're caught up with, like you were describing, Manada, thinking about just transfer or posting and this kind of stuff. And for many people, when you talk to them who are working within the public education system particularly, the one thing that they say is they feel like their hands are tied. It's not that they don't know better or they don't want to do better. Sometimes they feel like their hands are tied. So my one question is, if we were to do one thing to expand the space for people to exert leadership within the system, what could that one thing be? And I know this was not a question I shared with you earlier, so I'll give you some time to think if you need to.
Okay, yes, all right. So I guess similar and also touching on a little bit what Dr. Bari said is the juxtaposition of that, right? Like, if you want people to take ownership and take responsibility, then you have to create a system that's a little bit, that can withstand a little bit of pressure and essentially let go a little bit, right? So yes, we talk about systems change and big governance and all of those things, but in our heads at some level it's still like, very formulaic, very structured, and that's how societies, countries, schools are run. But having a little bit of an appetite of, all right, let's test this out a little bit. Of course, there's risk involved there, but you have to sort of be able to have a little bit of that appetite and let it go, and perhaps move a little bit beyond, especially if you're talking about leadership or positions of authority or power, then go beyond the qualifications aspect of things or the technical aspect of things, because I think as fellows or alumni or any space of work that we've seen, that a lot of moments, real moments of leadership, usually in cases of adversity where people are stepping up and sort of shocking us beyond what we thought was capable, actually comes from very unexpected people or sources. So actually recognizing that and almost predicting that, creating the space for that. So it sounds a little bit abstract, but it's also about, like, the system needs to be a little bit more flexible to sort of allow that to happen. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll build on what Faisal said, because मुझे थोड़ा tangible कि अच्छा ये करना है, मतलब मैं सुबह उठ के हमेशा सोचती हूँ अच्छा ये करना है. अच्छा, so I think teachers and principals are very, very important. So larger state, government, ज़्यादातर लोग, they don't have an appetite to recognize that kind of leadership. So we need to create platforms of recognition and of what is working. इस्लामाबाद कैपिटल में एक लीडर आया हुआ इस वक्त, वनी साहब, मोयुद्दीन वनी साहब, जो सेक्रेटरी हैं इधर के, ठीक है. बड़ा वो गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में बहुत स्कूलों को बदल के, अब हर रोज़ वो, मैं उनकी चैट पे हूँ, अब वो कितने स्कूलों में स्कूल मील प्रोग्राम शुरू कर दिया, कितने में स्टेम शुरू कर दिया, कितने में अर्ली चाइल्डहुड शुरू कर दी, कितने में पैसे लेके कमरे मतलब मैं कितने उनके स्कूलों में जा चुकी हूँ, और वो हर रोज़ तंग करते थे. अच्छा, आए हुए थे, हाँ वो, अच्छा ठीक है. तो मगर मैं उनसे हमेशा पूछती हूँ कि व्हेन यू गो व्हाट विल हैपन, दिस इज़ नॉट सस्टेनेबल. चले बस वो कर गए ना. सो द थिंग इज दिस, दैट मतलब एंड रिकग्निशन ऑफ व्हाट वर्क्स, व्हाट इज़ वर्किंग. इस्लामाबाद के स्कूलों में मेरे पास कितने लोग आते हैं, थोड़ा सा मेरी खरपैंची चल जाती है, मेरे पास कितने लोग आते हैं दाखिले के लिए बच्चों के लिए, because these are good schools and especially the model schools are really, really good schools. I'll switch to another example of my husband's constituency. 89, Shakargarh, Narowal, at the border of India, 89% women's literacy. Why? Because my father-in-law, Chaudhry Anwar Aziz Saab, was fixated on education. सुबह सुबह जब मेरी आँख खुलती थी, मतलब when I got newly married, तो मैं देखती थी कि मतलब मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लगता था क्योंकि मैं उस वक्त एजुकेशन में काम कर रही थी और मतलब यही अपने स्कूल वगैरह ठीक करना और सारा टीचर ट्रेनिंग वगैरह करना कि टीचर्स बैठे होते थे, ईडीओ बैठा होता था और वो सारे वो छोटे छोटे मसले जो होते थे जैसे इट वुड रिमाइंड मी ऑफ गार्डनिंग कि आपने रोज़ाना गोडी करनी है, रोज़ाना खाद डालनी है, आपने रोज़ाना पानी डालना है. इट्स लाइक दैट. सो द रेकग्निशन, तो वो उस वजह से उन्होंने वो सारी चीज़ें चलाई, वो आज तक चल रही हैं गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स. अब तो बहुत प्राइवेट स्कूल भी बढ़ गए. सो दैट रेकग्निशन ऑफ व्हाट इज़ वर्किंग as opposed to what is not working, keep on harping about what is not working, but what is working. And I think ये बहुत बड़ा पूल है. आप लोग जितने बैठे हुए ना, आपको लग रहा होगा कि आप एक कतरा है पाकिस्तान में. आप इतने ज़्यादा हैं कि अगर आप ट्विटर पे आ जाते हैं एज अ फोर्स या आप किसी और तरीके से आ जाते हैं, यू कैन रियली मेक अ डिफरेंस. जस्ट कंटिन्यू टू, आजकल वो यूट्यूबिंग और ये वो करके है ना, कंटिन्यू शेयरिंग the good things that you're doing. I tell you, that's the difference that we need. We need to hear that all the time. कि हम कहें भाई हम तो फैशन में ही नहीं हैं अगर हम education, we are not in fashion if you're not talking education and if you're not doing anything about education. Thank you.
Thank you. Janine.
It's such a complex question, and it's so difficult to even try to give a comprehensive answer. So I will not try this. I will focus on one thing. So we talked about system change and how that is possible. And we have all constituted, it's the people who constitute the system, and only people can change the system. So we are the system. And we need a critical mass of moving things around. And this critical mass is only effective if we have a shared values, we have shared perspectives on where we actually want to go together. So, and I'm not sure that we have that critical mass. I don't know about Pakistan. I'm sure we don't have it yet in Lebanon, which is why we do what we do. And we find very often, for us, these people with the conviction, people who recognize each other as alumni, they share this invincible bond of what they have gone through and what made them who they are today, and where they want the children of today, where they want them to see what they feel is a good life for them and how they can contribute in making this happen and being the enabler for the future generations. And you have one saying here in this book, I don't know if all of you read it already. The ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make and could just easily make differently. So if you ask me where do we have spaces to create change, I say go to the school and listen to the people who are actually there. Listen to the children, listen to the parents, listen to the teachers. What do they need? And try to enable that as best and as good as you can with the community you're serving.
Yeah, thank you. That was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. And I think the thing that that gives me a lot of hope, I think, for some of the ideas that have just been talked about, is what we're seeing in the federal system, and we know that this is the smallest of the territories in Pakistan, but this is where we're building out a model for what we want, what kind of change we want to see happen across Pakistan, and what particularly through our approach, our theory of change. And I think what we're seeing here is so incredible because we, far from critical mass yet, you're totally right. But we've got now these purpose-driven leaders in classrooms and schools, and then you've got them within the system, within domains where curriculum is being made, where assessments are being redesigned, where teachers are being developed and coached, and outside within businesses that are continuing to support kids and the overall infrastructure of education in a number of different ways. And that, I think, is what is enabling us to see like some of these reform efforts that even Manazapa you were referring to, that Vani Saab is spearheading. We're seeing all of those efforts become accelerated because there is this force of talent that is available to drive that change from across a number of vantage points in the system. And I'm so appreciative that many of those people are here with us today, and we've had this opportunity to learn alongside. And because I'm under threat, you can blame Rahat for this, because I think she's the one who handed me the note. I am not going to be taking any questions after this panel. And so let me just take this opportunity to thank my panelists. Thank you very much. So grateful that you all spent this much time with us today.
Thank you, Khatija, and her co-panelists. This brings her to the closure. Teach for Pakistan is very fortunate to have an incredibly committed board led by its chair, Mr. Nassir Kasuri, who has been with us throughout the day today. Kasuri Sahab is one of the directors of the Beacon House Education System, and also currently the executive director of the Beacon House Northern Region. Mr. Kasuri has been the chair of Teach for Pakistan board since 2017 and is one of our long-standing supporters. I request Nassir Kasuri Sahab to kindly please come and present a vote of thanks on behalf of our board, our staff, our fellows, our alumni, the entire community. Kasuri Sahab.
Thank you. Ms. Wendy Kopp, co-founder Teach for All, Ms. Khatija Bakhtiar, CEO Teach for Pakistan, esteemed delegates, Teach for Pakistan alumni, fellows, staff, guests, Assalamu alaikum. It's been a tremendous pleasure to attend this seminar today. In Beacon House, we actually have, a long history of holding seminars. We have something called the School of Tomorrow Conference every year. So I've had the privilege of being a part of many seminars. But, I can comfortably say, and I'm very happy to say, that the quality of discourse, discussion, insight, and passion today was absolutely at the highest level that I've witnessed. So many congratulations to everyone for showing up with so much commitment and sincerity. I'm heartened by the fact that across today's sessions, everybody present agreed on the importance of collective leadership in making learning outcomes for children the focus of systemic change in Pakistan. This missing link in policy discussion and reform strategies was identified early on today and reiterated throughout. So during the day, this issue was discussed looking at many different dimensions, and I'd just like to briefly go through some of the main things I took away from this. So there was a lot of discussion about the importance of public-private partnerships. I, personally am a big believer in the ability of the private sector to be a change agent in any sector, particularly in education. And we do have a very thriving private education sector in Pakistan. I think many of those folks are willing to step up and try to make a difference if given an opportunity. So I was really happy to hear a number of speakers endorse that view as well. Creating an enabling environment for teachers and supporting teachers, it's so important. Teachers get so much criticism in Pakistan, particularly government school teachers, but sometimes if you look at the kind of environments in which they have to work, and many of you actually have, so I mean in this case you have actually seen those environments, but you actually enter those environments with a huge amount of support from Teach for Pakistan. A lot of the government teachers who are working in those contexts really have very little support, so we have to recognize them and appreciate them for what they are doing, but we have to train them in order to make sure that they're able to fulfill their responsibilities to the youth of this country. So this is something that was discussed. You know, one of the secrets of our success in Beacon House has been teacher training. I think that's the one thing we are known for more than any other individual facet of our organization. And from experience, I can tell you that there's absolutely no substitute for it. Based on our experience, just knowing your subject isn't good enough. You do need to also know how to teach, and it does make a big difference. You know, the need to develop political will, very, very important. You know, there are some vested interests and agendas that maybe are not interested in educating people, particularly women. Educated people are more difficult to control. This is true. I'm hoping we can overcome that barrier, but I do believe that that is one of the barriers that we face in this country. Education must serve a economic, social, and personal development need as well. You know, it's not just about learning math, learning English. It's about education must teach you to be independent, to stand up for your rights, to understand what your rights are. And I think there was a discussion about the importance of teaching history and literature, liberal arts essentially, which historically in Pakistan we haven't done so much of. I think we've been so focused on math, science, and English. And math and science in particular, back in the day it was a going joke that, parents wanted, their sons to be engineers and daughters to be doctors. You can either be a doctor or an engineer by your profession, but really it's the liberal arts, it's literature, it's art that actually are the custodians of a culture and that give people their identity. I think there's a need to reinforce that value in our public education system to form a stronger sense of self for Pakistan. So that resonated very strongly with me as well. Aligning incentives with objectives is absolutely crucially important in any field, including education. And unfortunately, our structures in Pakistan are not set up to do that. Many interesting things. I mean, if I was to paraphrase the whole conference, it would probably take an hour, but I've been taking notes the whole time. And I have learned a lot today myself. Khatija reminded us systems don't change by themselves, people change them. And it's actually this realization, I found Wendy's talk really interesting. It's, this realization that really led to the foundation of the Teach for All network. In some ways, it sounds self-evident and obvious, but until you see something like this in practice, the proof of it, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So a lot of times we think that if we can design a really good system, write up a really good document, which makes a lot of logical sense, things will suddenly happen. And they actually don't, right? Unless people are trained, motivated, and passionate, nothing happens. In fact, arguably, you could take a bunch of trained, motivated, and passionate people and put them in a terrible system, and good things would probably happen, but not the other way around. And I think that's a really important thing that I've understood from today's session. And I think Teach for All and Teach for Pakistan have really demonstrated, the power of that approach. Every fellow that I've ever interacted with in the Teach for Pakistan network has been absolutely exceptional. I've told Khatija this in the past. I'm just in awe whenever I speak to a TFP fellow, and all credit goes to all of you guys and the whole TFP team for providing this amazing platform. But I sincerely believe that if the future of education in Pakistan is in your hands, then it's in very good hands. At Beacon House, we'll remain committed to supporting TFP's mission in Pakistan. Over the years, we've provided multifaceted support to TFP in terms of funding, infrastructure, and pretty much anything that they might need. We're super passionate about this mission. And TFP is a core part of our organization's ambition to really give back and to help drive education reform in Pakistan. I want to thank the delegates and participants who have traveled in many cases from very, very far away over here, especially our network partners from the other Teach for All network organizations around the world, and of course, led by the incredible Miss Wendy Kopp. Thank you so much for being here with us today. You know, your wholehearted participation has greatly enriched this discourse on leadership for systemic change. So more power to all of you. In fact, more power to all of us. I'm super motivated. Let us all come together and become the agents of systemic change that Pakistan needs. Thank you everyone for being here today, and Pakistan Zindabad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasuri Sahab. You want to say something? Yeah.
So I know we're at the end of a very long day, but कुछ ही चीज़ों के लिए time नहीं बचता, मगर I did want to take a moment. If I can just bring to you the team that has organized Teach for Pakistan's first ever conference. Rabia, can you please come up on stage? Tareem, can you come up on stage? Hamna, can you come up on stage? Umair, can you come up on stage? Who am I missing, Rabia? Salman, kidhar hai? Aa jaye. And there's a huge other, Haris is up in the control room somewhere. There's like many other people at Teach for Pakistan who've been involved, but this is the team that's been doing all of this thinking and pushing so hard to bring this experience to all of us. And I just want to say huge, huge kudos to you guys. Thank you for all of the hard work that you do. I'm getting emotional now, so I won't say more. But you are superheroes. And Rabia Chaudhry, this is an amazing day. Thank you. Thank you.
With this, we officially declare today's conference closed. On your way out, if you feel like it, kindly grab a cup of tea. There's tea served outside. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Thanks a lot. Good evening.